going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
And we need to introduce and enact an increase to the Hamilton County sales tax at a rate of 1/2 cent for 8 years, and then reduced to 1/4 cent for 7 additional years.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. On last Thursday, county and city officials joined together to announce a comprehensive public safety plan that includes an increase in the sales tax as just announced by Todd Portune. In addition to that, the county faces a whole plate of challenges, demands by communities for immediate assistance with bringing down the crime rate, and also a clock ticking on the funding packages for the Banks project. How do all these things get balanced? I'm joined this morning by Todd Portune, the president of Hamilton County Commission, who is either balancing or juggling. It is a little unclear on any one day. Hi, Todd. Welcome back.
Thanks, Dan.
This plan that you announced yesterday, and it involves building, doing some renovation at the current facility downtown, building a new 1,800 bed facility out on Spring Grove Avenue on some donated property by Sarah Lee, what a lot of people would know as the old Cons plant, doing some other things in the juvenile area. But the key here is that the sales tax, 1/2 cent and 1/4 cent over 15 years, that doesn't have to go to the voters. How did you come up with that? How did you decide that was the way to go?
Well, we haven't decided that that's the way to go yet, first of all. And the other thing that I think bears emphasizing, Dan, is while you emphasize the facilities improvements, and there is a new facility, consolidated facility being built that will save us over $200 million over 30 years in operational expenses because of the efficiencies provided, and renovations to the Justice Center in addition to our juvenile justice facilities, which is new but necessary to keep the juvenile crime rate down. In addition to all that, we are looking at a comprehensive public safety plan that contains a major reformation to our criminal justice system. The whole intake process, how we assess people, whether people have to remain in the Justice Center pre-trial or can better serve that time period by being somewhere else, getting people lined up for the right kind of assistance, whether it is mental health treatment or substance abuse treatment or things like that. It is a comprehensive public safety plan that also includes some other safety enhancements in the 49 villages, cities, and towns of Hamilton County. But the thing you mentioned of, do we just do it as a board? It's one of the issues or options that's on the table that, frankly, we're asking the general public to weigh in on. Whether
And there's going to be a series of public meetings.
There
right?
are, in fact, that. But the bottom line is, we have to figure out some way to address all of these issues, and we're out of options. There's no money in the bank of the county to pay for these things. There's just not. Some people continue to say that, but those are political arguments. They're not factual.
Last fall, there was a proposal on the ballot,
yes,
which went down pretty decisively. Mm-hmm. Now you're coming back, and one of the options is not to go back to the ballot. In other words, one way of putting it, bypassing the voters. And is that because you know you can't get it past the voters right now? Does your polling show you that you don't have enough support?
No, on the contrary. And what went down last November wasn't a full plan. There were no dollars to operate the facility that was proposed to be built. There wasn't even a site on where to put it. We've got all those issues wrapped up in this plan. This plan is complete. It has the dollars to run the facility we build. The facility itself is less expensive than what was on the ballot in November, and we're going to build it at donated property, which saves us about $7 million right there as well, in a community that wants it, Camp Washington. So all those things are lined up. Our preference is to go to the voters in August with a ballot measure. But we don't have right now the authority from the state legislature to do that. We need their permission to do that. And absent that authority, our options on a ballot measure are to go in November, which is going to be a very crowded ballot. There are 2 other levies on the ballot that we know of right now countywide. It's a city council election year, which, and I say this with all due respect, I was a veteran of 4 of these, but it's a circus atmosphere, city council races. Or to carry it forward to the March presidential primary election. But at that point, we're almost a year away, a year without any solution in place, and literally we've run out of money. So our ballot options are becoming extremely difficult and limited. But understand, our preference is to go to the voters in August. But if we don't get authority from the state legislature to do that, our other 2 options, November or March, have a whole host of difficulties as well, and we have got to solve this problem somehow.
Do you have the legal authority to raise a half cent and then roll it back in 8 years to a quarter cent? Do you have the legal authority to do that?
We do, subject to the right of referendum of the people.
And that's a distinct possibility, that,
sure
that somebody will take it, or at least attempt to gather the
Sure
signatures and take it to the ballot.
That's right, that's right. But that's why yesterday's announcement was so important, all the support that was there. We had virtually every jurisdiction of Hamilton County represented, police chiefs, public administration officials, mayors, council members, township trustees. There's great support for this, in addition to other public officials like Joe Dieters and Odell Owens.
Who wasn't there? Was your 3rd commissioner, Pat DeWine, a Republican? Was he there?
No, he was not there.
I didn't see him.
He does not support this plan. I mean, let's be very clear about that.
That's right.
But we have bent over backwards to include Commissioner DeWine in this process. Contrary to the experience I had a year ago as the minority member of the board, I've made every opportunity available to Pat to be a part of this. But sometime over the past several months, he chose, for whatever reason, to quit being constructive and to work constructively. And that doesn't mean necessarily to work on what David and I are putting together, but he just quit being constructive on the issue and began being political on the issue, and has thrown out a suggestion, which I won't even call a proposal, because it's not even that. He doesn't even have the money to fund his own plan, much less to pay for the cost to operate whatever might be built under that proposal. So he's been out there being critical of this, but the reality is there is no other option to get things done and to get them done correctly.
If you need the authority from the state legislature to move forward in August,
that's right.
What state legislators do you have on your side right now, and who don't you have? Do you, for example, not have the Coast people, Brinkman?
Well, I can say with certainty, no, we do not have Representative Brinkman. But that's the extent of naming names, I think, that I'll go. We want to be very positive with the state legislature and continue to work with them. I think, in fairness to our legislators, until yesterday there was not a complete proposal out there for them to consider whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and whether to give us the authority to move forward in August or not. But clearly today we don't have the necessary support from the legislature across the board in order to go to the voters in August. So that creates this whole series of difficulties that we have, and meanwhile crime continues, homicides continue, juvenile crime continues on the rise, and we're running out of money, Dan. I mean, this issue of sending people to Butler County, we can't afford much longer.
How long can you wait to figure out whether or not the state legislature is going to give you, how far ahead of August do you need to know from the state legislature whether you have authority to go to the ballot?
May 23rd is the last day.
That's pretty soon.
It's very soon.
Okay.
Yeah, about a week and a half.
All right. Speaking of immediate and crime issues, on April the 22nd, you, Republican Charlie Winburn, Charterite Melanie Bates, both candidates for City Council, and Chris Kearney, announced that you had developed a list of 1,546 of the county's most violent criminals. This has the flavor, in my mind, this list in my pocket someplace that's never been produced, of a little bit of a Joe McCarthy sense about this. Was and especially in the midst of the circus of a council race, as you put it, why did you do this? Why did you line up with a Republican and a Charterite in a council race and announce that there's 1,546 people?
Well, I never announced that, first of all, that there's 1,546 people. What was presented is a way to model existing crime data that has not been done before. It is a way to look at past behaviors of individuals who are not saints. I mean, and one of the things, you throw out this Joe McCarthyism in that, well, McCarthyism was based on suspicion on suspicion on suspicion. This is a way to model past criminal behavior. Understand that anybody who would end up on a list produced by this model is someone who has a history of engaging in criminal activity involving drugs, criminal activity involving guns, criminal activity involving crimes involving violence, and repeated history and committing a crime in the last 12 months, and being on either probation or parole or a current warrant out for their arrest. This is not somebody who was just in the wrong place, wrong time, or anything like that.
I understand that, and I grant that. But if you
well,
look...
when you say McCarthyism, Dan, it suggests in people's minds a whole specter of things that this is not at all.
But there was always a question with McCarthy whether you could, did he ever have the list?
Yeah.
That, and they just kept, and the list seemed to grow and shrink. Is there a list here?
Well, sure there is. Sure there is. But here's
who has it?
Well, Chris Kearney has the developer of the model has a list. But understand, the list changes daily because included in the modeling is that the individuals involved have to have engaged in criminal activity within the last 12 months. So it's going to constantly change. And what it's really not, it's not so much a list, and that was the paper's promotion. I've never talked about a list. I've talked about this new way of analyzing data to be more targeted in police activity and in directing the right intervention specialists to work proactively with people to keep them on the straight and narrow. And so the idea here is to use this model as a tool for law enforcement and intervention specialists to be more efficient in the work that they do.
But if you look at Charlie Winburn's website, and it seems to me, and we can see some of it here, in a letter that he includes in that website, he calls these people out, and he uses the number 1546, and he says 57% are not in jail where they should be. The point here is, in our society, we don't jail people for their propensity to crime.
Right.
Even if somebody's on parole, even if they're a bad person and they've done a lot of bad things, they don't necessarily intend to be back in jail.
No,
Why shouldn't we just see this as a campaign trick?
Well, I agreed to be the recipient of information that I understood Melanie Bates was working on many months ago. Melanie and I talked about this. She and I have a very long-standing relationship in the political system and also just as friends.
And she's going to be a guest here next segment.
Well,
on something else.
But long before Melanie was a candidate or Charlie was a candidate, we talked about developing a better way to synthesize the data, because the experience that led to tracking down the killer of her husband was developed by Chris Kearney, who synthesized data. And from that process, they were developing this new model to allow police to be more proactive and more targeted. That's the origin of this. That it finally got to a point where it was ready to present after Melanie and Charlie were candidates is just the way things work.
Okay.
Well, you got to hear this though, Dan.
Okay.
The 57% that you talk about there,
that Charlie talks about.
That Charlie talks about. The one trial run that Chris Kearney ran in February of 2007 that information is related to, 57% of the names on that list had active warrants out for their arrest. And that's what that comes from. Now, police do not arrest everybody that has a warrant out for them simply because they're overwhelmed by the number of warrants. And what this is it says, helps them to prioritize who they're going to serve warrants on. That 57% though is not we think you're going to do something bad and you should be in prison. A warrant is out for your arrest right now. You should be arrested.
Okay, Todd, I'm out of time. I'm over time, but I got one more question I have to ask. Going into this week, this is the week we think we should hear something about the banks in the terms of the financing package. Where are we on that? Where do you think we'll be by this time next week?
Well, I think we're very close, and I expect there to, at a minimum, be an announcement of a term sheet, if you will, that covers all the issues or virtually all of the issues. Now, it may be that they haven't resolved everything as of the 15th of next week, but things are very, very close, and I think that Mayor Mallory and I are going to get personally involved in some of the issues as well over the coming week.
So you're feeling basically positive?
I am still feeling very, very good about this. I'm cautiously optimistic, and everybody is motivated, I think, to get this done, and I still feel very good about that.
Very good. Thank you for being
Thanks,
here.
Dan.
Stay tuned. After the break, a proposal to shake things up in the Cincinnati Public Schools. The Cincinnati Public Schools have been under the direction of an independent Board of Education since a set of progressive reforms in 1907. Given the growing frustration of many with the quality of the educational product and the flight of parents with school-aged children from the city, should governance of the city schools be rethought? Welcome back. In the past decade, several cities across the country have decided to eliminate their independent school boards and bring public education directly under the mayor and the city government of particular cities. In New York City and Chicago, the results have been positive. Now, a member of Cincinnati City Council has at least floated the idea that something similar might be a good idea here. I am joined now by Chris Bortz, charter member of Cincinnati City Council, who has floated this proposal, and Melanie Bates, the vice president of the Cincinnati Board of Education. Melanie is in the very strange position that she is also right now a candidate on the charter slate for City Council. So now on the school board, and there's ideas floating out here. Welcome, and both of you back to Newsmakers. Chris, why put this idea out there right now?
Well, I think clearly the system we have in place isn't working. I think we have to put every idea on the table and make a radical change to the way we govern our school system. I think it's become overly politicized. It's become lost in its own rebuilding plan, and the children are getting lost in the process. So what can we do to create a centralized policy-making board that is aligned to make real changes instead of always competing at the individual level? I think, as Melanie will tell you, it's very difficult to accomplish something unless you can convince at least a small majority on the board.
Would council then just run the schools just as it runs other departments of the city?
I think that's a step further than we would need to go. My suggestion for the discussion anyway, not really a proposal, is that the mayor and council who jointly make appointments would appoint the board. The administration of the schools could still be independent under the board, but now you've insulated the board from politics. And there may be opportunities, Melanie and I were discussing this earlier, to create efficiencies by overlapping administrative responsibilities, human resources, payroll, like certain kinds of accounting, facilities management, IT. Okay. You could potentially create savings there, but the operations of schools is very different than operating a city.
So what you're trying to do is open the conversation.
Exactly.
Melanie, wearing your school board hat, you obviously know about these sorts of proposals that have been implemented in some cities. What's your initial reaction to this?
Well, I was on the state board during the Cleveland.
The State Board of Education.
Yeah, and when the State Department of Education took over the Cleveland School District. So I was on the state board when our state superintendent was part of that takeover and the eventual mayoral takeover. So I have some insider experience as far as.
And how do you feel that? That's an Ohio situation.
Right.
How do you feel that went?
Well, what it did was that it improved the political environment and it improved the capacity of the Cleveland Public Schools. So it did work in that instance. The department took over for a period of time. went in and did some things politically that the insiders could not do, reorganized the district administratively, and then handed actually the judge and the state legislature handed the district back to the locals, who eventually decided they wanted the mayor to appoint the board by referendum.
I'm sure you've heard up there on Highland Avenue at the board headquarters, you've heard Chris's idea. Mm-hmm. What's been the reaction?
Well,
any reaction?
I mean, there has been some reaction. I think what we have a relatively different board now within the last 2 years. The majority has shifted, and we are doing some things that a new board under a mayor would do. We've had a financial analysis, which has unearthed the $39 million discrepancy. We're working with Strive now, the board and the administration is, for a reform effort. And we are also working with McKinsey, who's doing an audit of central office, all which would have to be done in any kind of change and transition. So this board is doing that at this time, and I would expect that any new administration and board would do that as well.
Chris, okay, this is an idea. This is something to be discussed. Are you interested in pushing this forward? Are you interested in driving this to become a real part of the community discussion?
Well, I'm interested in it being part of our discussion because I think all of us have a responsibility with the school system. It's absolutely key to the economic development of our city, the growth, the health, the vitality of our region. We need an excellent public school system. We should have the best in the state, the best in the tri-state. So all ideas should be on the table. So I'm interested in pushing the conversation, but I'm probably not the guy to take the lead on an initiative to put the mayor in charge of the school board.
Who would be?
I think it'd have to be a collective decision, and hopefully when the discussion begins, it'll evolve to define that leader.
For almost as long as I can remember as a reporter or a host of this show for 11 years or whatever, always there are candidates for city council who run on the top thing they've got is, I'm going to improve education. And of course, if they do that, the first question I ask them when they get on here is, how are you going to do it from City Hall, folks? Do you understand the difference here? So this has always been out there, but never, you know, people want to, they know it's important to the city, but they don't know what to do about it. So the question really is, you're saying you've got to put a group of people together.
I think so. Now the mayor made it part of his platform when he was running for office. He's already launched a number of initiatives through City Hall to engage the educational environment and the youth employment environment. So there's certainly overlap already. Okay. We've had a couple of joint meetings with the school board, which I think were very productive in establishing relationships. So the process maybe has already started. Melanie,
in recent weeks, there's been this view of the school board as can't even decide what it needs to decide view of about evaluating Rosa Blackwell and how to do that, when to do that. Is the school board, is the internal mechanism of the schools, is it dispirited? Because from the outside, I think a lot of people looking at the schools say, oh my gosh, where is this whole thing? Where have we gotten ourselves? What is the mood there? And therefore, how receptive is anybody to this?
Well, I kind of look at it differently. When our board majority came in, what we wanted to do was give more transparency to the work of the board. Well, you're seeing the good with the bad. The superintendent's evaluation and the discussion of the process used to be handled in executive session. This isn't new. What's new is that you're seeing how we're operating. So, you know.
I don't know if that's good news or bad news.
Well, it's good news for newsmakers, but
yeah. So why is this, let's ask the big question, we probably have about a minute left. What is the importance of this from the city's point of view? Why is this a valuable discussion?
There is nothing more important than the school system from the city's point of view. Every citizen of the city, every citizen of Southwest Ohio, every citizen of the tri-state region, the Cincinnati public school system should be premier. It must be premier if we're going to succeed as a region, continue to attract young professionals to our environment, attract young families. We have to have the best school system around, so everything should be on the table.
Melanie, as you're a candidate out there for city council now, not for school board this time, Is that what you're hearing? And we've got about half a minute left. Is that what you're hearing too?
Well, yes. I mean, people are leaving for voucher schools, for charter schools. We need not to just rely on the policymakers. We need to get the community involved in this conversation, and this proposal gets the community involved.
Okay. Well, this is a proposal, this type of proposal is something I've been interested in for some time. I'm glad it's on the table. No matter what we decide, I'm glad it's on the table. So Chris, thanks for putting it out there.
Sure.
And gee, I bet I'll talk to you guys in the next few months. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women trying like heck to shape our community for the future. Have a good week.